But what if I told you that these opposites actually aren't in conflict? Instead, they're two sides of the same coin, and each contributing to a greater wholeness. Confused? Stick with me. By understanding this, we can learn to work with life's dualities rather than resist them. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. The Kabbalion. Curious what that actually means? Well, welcome back to the podcast. So glad to have you guys here. Over the past few episodes, we've explored Hermetic principles that guide creation, mentalism, correspondence, and vibration. These principles have shown us that reality is deeply interconnected and shaped by the energy we carry. Today, we're diving into another fundamental Hermetic principle, the law of polarity. Polarity teaches us that everything in life has its opposites: light and dark, joy and sorrow, abundance and lack. But what if I told you that these opposites actually aren't in conflict? Instead, they're two sides of the same coin, and each contributing to a greater wholeness. Confused? Stick with me. By understanding this, we can learn to work with life's dualities rather than resist them. As always, nature can be our greatest teacher. Polarity is embedded in these cycles we observe in nature: day and night, winter and summer, growth and decay. These opposites are essential for balance and harmony. We'll explore how embracing both ends of the spectrum help us navigate life with more grace and clarity. So today's episode is all about understanding how the law of polarity shows up in our lives and how we can use it as a tool for growth, transformation, and balance. All right, let's start with the basics. In Hermetic philosophy, polarity teaches us that all things have two sides. And these opposites are not in opposition. Actually, they're complementary. I know, you're probably going, what are you talking about? A classic example of this is temperature. Hot and cold are two extremes of the same spectrum. Temperature. When you turn down the heat, you move toward cold. And when you turn it up, you move towards heat. They aren't separated, they're interconnected. Now, this principle applies to everything, including our emotions. Joy and sorrow, for example, exist along the same emotional spectrum. You can't fully appreciate joy without having experienced sorrow. One gives meaning to the other. Polarity shows us that every extreme we encounter has its counterpart, and understanding both sides is key to our growth. In nature, polarity is beautifully reflected in cycles of day and night. Night allows us to rest and reflect, while day brings energy and growth. Without one, the other would not have the same value or purpose. Life thrives in this rhythm, and so do we. We're not meant to live in perpetual day or summer, and we need those cycles of rest, reflection, and even struggle to nourish our own growth. Okay, let's take this idea even deeper. Think about how dualities show up in your life. Do you find yourself resisting one side of the spectrum? You can definitely see that right now in our society, where you have a country who's very divided, and love and hate would be on opposite ends of the spectrum. One believed that they're actually right and making the others wrong, but they're actually the same. It just depends on what degree you're moving towards. If you're creating more division among us all, then you're probably moving towards hate. But if you're looking for understanding, compassion, empathy, doesn't mean you have to agree, but you can have understanding and know that we can all sit at the same table and have different viewpoints, then you're probably moving more towards love. Same spectrum, just different degrees. So do you find yourself resisting one side of the spectrum? Maybe you prefer joy over sorrow or abundance over scarcity, and feel uncomfortable when the undesirable opposite shows up, just like I gave in the example of love and hate. But polarity asks us to see both as necessary parts of life's rhythm. By embracing both ends, we unlock a deeper understanding of ourselves. In my life, polarity played a significant role in one of the most challenging periods of my life. Years ago, about 10 years ago, I suffered a TBI, traumatic brain injury, that left me with 1% chance of survival. The injury stripped me of my identity, my work, my sense of taste and smell, and 90% of the hearing in my left ear. Hence, which you can't see it, I wear a hearing aid. That incident plunged me into a really deep depression, that it was layered, but it was dark. And I felt like I was living in a perpetual darkness. I felt like if you had dropped me in the middle of a tunnel and I couldn't see either end, I didn't know which way was out or even how far the exit was. It was all-encompassing and probably one of the darkest times of my life. Fear, confusion, isolation became my daily companions. I felt like I was stuck in this dark night of the soul where all hope seemed lost. At the time, I couldn't see how light, joy, or healing could even exist again. My parents became pretty concerned because I literally would go to work, what little work I could do. I was working part-time at a grocery store, and I had to move back in with my parents to get the treatment I needed. So I would literally go to work, come home, do nothing, repeat the process. Barely talk to them, could barely function. It took everything I could just to pull myself out of bed every day. I didn't want to be here. I thought, if this is how my life is meant to be, why did I survive this? Eventually, that just got so bad, and I knew all the tools, right? I knew the things that I could use to help get me out of it, but none of it was working. I didn't really care, to be honest, or did I want to hear it? So eventually, I got to the point where I knew I had to do something. I couldn't help myself, and so I needed to seek help. So I began looking for a therapist who actually ended up doing EMDR therapy, something I knew nothing about, but it was a therapist, and I was willing to do whatever she needed me to do. I even remember going into her office and saying to her, I don't care what I have to do. I don't care if I have to cry on your floor for the next 6 months. I just don't want to feel like this anymore. I felt like I was treading water and this close to drowning. And I remember her looking at me and saying, so drowned. And I was shocked. But she grabbed me and she said, I'm not going to let you drown, but you've got to get out of survival mode. And I can help you if you're willing to open up and be present and work with me. And of course I was. She's like, you'll be the perfect client. And so after I started doing my work with her, I started to climb out of the darkness. And I realized that I was there for about a year working with her. And there's a lot more to that story, but I'm not going to go into it right now. Just know that that pivotal woman in that moment saved my life wholeheartedly. But I had to be open to exploring the opposite ends of these dark feelings I was feeling. And I was. Because I was sick of being on that darkness part of the polarity scale. I was ready for more light. So the turning point for me came when I decided to become an ambassador for others with TBI injuries. I was in this program. They asked me, would I be interested? And I did. And that reflection back to me was also another key turning point, because seeing other survivors be able to look at me and say, look how far you've come in a year. Look, I can see all the growth and there's a sparkle in your eye again. Where I didn't even notice that was monumental. They were mirroring back to me the energy and the frequency that now I was admitting. And so now I became a light for them. And I started to find my own light. And they would look to me and say, you've inspired me. You've shown me a new way. And I knew that that was a great measuring stick, that polarity scale that I was on was now moving back towards what I wanted to be at. And it wasn't until recently that I was able to look back and know I was on this polarity scale, and the polarity was at work. And the profound sorrow I experienced allowed me to appreciate now the joy and the purpose I feel today. I always say that my brain injury is one of the greatest blessings of my life. And it took me a long time to get to this point, but I truly, truly mean that. And sometimes people look at me like I'm crazy. It's the truth. Because without that depth of that sorrow that I had, I wouldn't have the capacity that I have for compassion and gratitude today. My experience with the loss showed me how light and dark work together to shape who we are, and it's shaped me profoundly in who I am today. Just as the earth goes through seasons, we too experience winters of the soul. But without winter, spring's renewal wouldn't hold the same meaning. I came to realize that the darkness wasn't a failure. It was an essential part of my personal evolution. And so many times we judge the darkness that we're brought into. But I'm asking you to look at it from this polarity law and understand that you're still on the same spectrum of darkness and light. You're just further over to one way, and you can choose now to go the other way. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to pause for a moment and give you a few questions to contemplate. You can write them down or, come back to them on this podcast, but really take time to sit with these. Questions will really help to start this journey. So can you think back to a time when you were in a state of extreme, whether it was joy, sorrow, abundance, or lack? And how did the opposite eventually show up in your life? Because it will. Just like if you were blissed out and life was going great, and then all of a sudden eventually something dips, right? You go back into some rough waters and some darkness. That's that ebb and flow of life. It's that polarity scale. How did moving between these two poles shape you? Now, these are great questions for you to look back at just scenarios that you've had and see your own growth and be able to look at that and go, oh yeah, I can see where polarity was playing in that instance right now. So take a few minutes to reflect on those, or even journal after this episode about how the extremes in your life have guided your personal growth. What have you learned from navigating these dualities? And I guarantee you've learned something, and it probably shifted your life in some profound ways. And it doesn't have to be traumatic like mine. It could be even simple things, but were pivotal moments in your life that shifted things. So if this exploration of polarity is resonating with you, I encourage you to check out my Revver Tales series on Substack. Each Monday, I post new content expanding on these themes that we discuss here, but with deeper insights and fresher perspectives. This week, I'll be diving into how polarity shows up not only in our emotional and physical worlds, but also in spiritual transformation and the quantum field. It's about understanding how opposites work together in more ways than we might realize, from ancient alchemy to modern science. And then on Thursday, I post a fun, interactive follow-up. Whether it's through journaling, meditation, creative exercises, it's a chance to engage with the concept of polarity in your own life. So be sure to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. I'd love to see you guys there and be a part of that community. So another area of my life where polarity has shown up is in the contrast between scarcity and abundance. After my brain injury, I lived in survival mode like I've spoken about for years. I felt like I was stuck in the mindset of scarcity all the time, constantly fearing that something would take away what little I had left, which is understandable considering everything I had gone to. But even when my external circumstances began to improve, I struggled to let go of that scarcity mindset. I had spent 10 years cultivating that subconsciously mindset, right? I wasn't out there doing it on purpose, but life had kind of molded me in that fashion. So here's what I've realized, that scarcity and abundance, as we both know, are two ends of the same spectrum. So you can't appreciate one without having experienced the other. So I realized that I've experienced the scarcity. Now I want to experience the abundance. So by shifting my perspective, I'm starting to embrace abundance more, not just in terms of wealth, but in how I value myself, my time, my relationships, moments in nature, things that bring me joy. I've learned to honor my own worth, which I've spoke about in the previous podcast, set up great boundaries, and move out of this survival mode into now a space of creation. This whole second season of my podcast, that's what I'm focused on, is creation and creators and people who are creating things and creating their own lives, because we can do the transformation, we can do the butterfly, we can do all those things, but now what do we do when we come out? What do we do as we come out as this new version of ourselves? What will we create? So this dynamic of abundance and scarcity and abundance aren't isolated experiences. They are interconnected. And by acknowledging the lessons of scarcity, I learned to create abundance in my life. It hasn't been easy, but honoring both ends of the spectrum, I moved into a mindset that allowed now more expansion and growth. I'm getting excited about my life again, and I feel like I'm actually creating instead of reacting. Again, two other opposite ends of the spectrum, creation, reaction. Same. It feels good to finally be excited about life again. And in the natural world, we see this dynamic in the tides. The ocean is one of the places I love to be. I love to just sit there and listen to the waves roll in. But if you pay attention to the ocean, it shows you that low tide makes way for high tide. And the cycle continues, right? Life is always ebbing and flowing. Understanding this rhythm has helped me to embrace both ends of the spectrum and trusting that abundance is always available, even when I can't see it and I'm way down on the other end of the spectrum feeling scarcity. Thinking of polarity in this way helps me to visualize like a thermometer or a scale and going, where am I on this scale? Scarcity, abundance. And it's become an easy tool for me to go, oh, I'm more towards scarcity, but I want to go over here more towards abundance. That means I need to shift my mindset, change my frequency. So we've covered how polarity helps us embrace life's contrasts. But what happens when life's challenges don't follow a predictable pattern? In the next episode, we'll be diving into the law of rhythm, the natural cycles of life that influence everything from your energy to your manifestations. So please, if you found this was helpful, that you got anything out of this, make sure you just subscribe so you don't miss any of these episodes, because in the next one, we're going to learn how to ride the waves of life, even when the tides shift unexpectedly. So trust me, this is one you're not going to want to miss. Until next time, stay aligned, stay present, and keep creating my amazing ones. I love you guys.